Welcome to another conversation in our CBF Conversation series. We are glad you have joined us again today. We're excited to bring you stories from folks doing work to renew God's world from across our fellowship. I'm your host, John Mark Bowes, for this week. We have a conversation about creating a rescue loan ministry at your church from folks who have been doing this work in their congregation for quite a while now. This is the second event as part of CBF Conversations, a new series of live and recorded video discussions on faith and culture topics for the benefit of Christians and congregations. You can find recordings of previous conversations and the schedule of upcoming conversations at www.cbf.net/conversations. Before we start off our conversation, you should know that you have the opportunity to ask questions of our panelists. If you're on Facebook, comment in the panel on the right. We will attempt to do our best to get to your questions. Fortunately, we can't promise that we'll get to every question, but we will do our best. So today, we're here talking about rescue loan ministries that your church can start. I want to first talk about the impetus for CBF to create such a resource and what it entails. First and foremost, there's a real need for such a resource in CBF life. Churches who identify as being part of CBF deeply care about the work of protecting those in poverty from the payday lending debt trap. Churches across the fellowship have already identified that there's a real need for rescue loans to protect the most vulnerable in their own communities. The payday debt trap is dangerous and harms communities where CBF congregations reside. CBF advocacy has also been engaged since its inception in working to find policy solutions to the debt trap. CBF advocacy has become and is a national leader on policy reform in this area. However, offering a resource to congregations to create and develop their own ministry is a new area for us. We firmly believe that this work serves to continue the fight against predatory lending and offers congregations a concrete method to engage and walk with their communities that are negatively impacted by predatory lending. But another reality is that current forms of benevolence in congregations are just not sustainable to meet the needs of those in poverty. If we take the call of Jesus to proclaim good news to the poor seriously in Luke 4, then we must find ways as communities of faith to proclaim such good news. So we have to shift our mindset to a reframing of sorts of benevolence that is sustainable. So CBF advocacy saw a need that needed to be filled. Our work began by organizing churches that we knew were already doing this work and finding out their best practices. This pilot group, if you will, included Butyl Park Baptist Church in Louisville, Kentucky, First Baptist Church in Frankfort, Kentucky, Olive Branch Ministries in Somerset, Kentucky, Trinity Baptist Church in Seneca, South Carolina, Church for the Highlands in Shreveport, Louisiana, University Heights Baptist Church in Springfield, Missouri, and Second Baptist Church in Liberty, Missouri. They all eagerly shared their stories and what worked best for their own ministries. So we created a video resource that is designed to guide churches through the what, who, how, and why to create their own ministries. That video resource is now available on the CBF website. Visit www.cbf.net/rescue loans to find out more and to view the resource. Each of those congregations were also generous with their print resource that were required, such as budget worksheets, applications, and other resources. You can find a selection of those that you can download at the bottom of the webpage. This is important work. All congregations across the fellowship and even outside of the fellowship have reached out to discover more about how they can develop their own ministry to care for their community. Let me now welcome to the conversation Stephen Reeves, Scarlette Jasper, Bob Perry, and Keith Felton. Thank you all for joining the conversation today.
Thanks, John Mark.
Thanks for having us.
You're welcome. I want to first pose a question to you, Stephen. Stephen, how is this work a natural outgrowth of CBF's advocacy efforts? And what does it say about congregations who are so willing to find creative solutions to such a dangerous problem?
Well, John Mark, first I want to say thanks to you for all of your hard work in pulling together these resources and making it available more widely across the fellowship. And thanks to Keith and Bob and Scarlette for their good work and for joining us on this video today. Interestingly, our advocacy actually starts with mission. So this is getting back to where we began in many ways. So when I first started looking at the problem of predatory lending, payday and auto title loans, I began hearing story after story from pastors and other ministries of people who have been impacted. So the first one I heard, I think a gentleman took out a $700 loan, was paying over $200 every 2 weeks and not reducing what he owed. And so when a church finally stepped in and was able to pay it off, that $700 loan cost over $3,000 in 5 months. So this, I mean, the practice is immoral, and our folks have seen it. And so we believe firmly that policy solutions are necessary, that this used to not be legal, it used to be illegal, and it is immoral. And so we've made a shift in policy that is now allowing corporations to exploit the vulnerable at their very time of need and desperation. That is a change that we have to reverse. And so for those maybe not familiar with how these loans work, they're supposed to be short-term loans, but the problem is when the lender knows that people can't repay, they make more money when folks can't repay, whether it's paying only interest and fees week after week and month after month and not reducing what they owe, or if they actually are able to pay off the loan, they can't make it another 2 weeks or another month to that paycheck. So the business model is designed to really create that trap, as you said, and they make a lot more money when they give these loans to people who can't afford it. So we're hoping for policy change that at least says folks have to know the people that are taking out loans can afford to repay it and continue on and really operate as advertised. So they're not operating as advertised. They're very expensive and they're harmful. But we can't. When someone comes to your church or congregation looking for help, that their rent is due and they can't pay it because of a payday loan, or their light bill or their payday loan fees are due, you can't tell them, don't worry, we called Congress or the CFPB. We have to help them right then and there. And so this resource grew out of our knowledge of these folks in our network who were doing that very, very well in a sophisticated way. So in some ways, these are very advanced forms of benevolence that really can help folks in the community. So for us, it begins in mission work. It begins in what folks are doing to help those in their community. We want to add advocacy and justice work for systemic and policy change. But when we see such good mission work, good benevolence, we want to promote it and say, this is maybe a sustainable way to help out people in your community.
Sure. I think a lot of us have known folks over our time who've been around payday loans, who are the victims of these things, and we've seen how it is just really destroyed their lives in some way. So I'm interested to hear from some of you all. How did you all decide to get this ministry started? Was it somebody coming to you? Did you see a problem that you needed to go address? What was that like? So how did this ministry start in your church or organization? And what did you do to get off the ground? And Keith, we'll go to you first for that one.
Yeah, I first learned about the payday lending industry in Texas when I was a pastor at First Baptist Church of Hamilton, actually through Stephen Reeves and Susie Painter working at the Christian Life Commission. And when I moved back to Kentucky in 2016, I became the minister of missions here at First Baptist Frankfort. And being familiar with the payday loan industry, I was responsible for benevolence ministry of our church. And being a downtown church, we have people come to our front doors every day. That was pre-pandemic. And so as they would come to the door and asking for help with an electrical bill or rent or some other type of bill that they were behind on, I just started doing a little private survey as far as just asking them. I would ask them if they've ever had a payday loan, and then they would name, one of the storefronts or something like that. And I said, yeah, that's it. And I would ask them about the loan and how long they've been paying on it and that sort of thing. And most of the time we could help them with the bill, but I just kept a running list of folks who had this payday loan problem that was really the root problem of them having bills being behind, because they had to pay that payday loan bill first and then they would get behind on something else. And so about, I don't know, 6-8 months into it, I took that understanding to the church, and I started trying to educate the church at large about, number one, what payday loans are, and how prominent they are, how prevalent they are, how damaging they are to people. And really, if we could take care of someone's payday loan, then they would have room to pay their electrical bill or their rent or something of that nature. And our church has a history of just being dynamic in ministry, in missions, as far as learning about a need, being educated about a need, and then trying to act on it. And so we went through about another 6 months of just educating ourselves and talking through what could be possible. And we've always considered this to be in the meantime ministry, because I think the most important work that can be done here is advocating for reform in legislation, because it needs to be stopped, and it has to be stopped on a political level and a legislature issue. And so we advocate for that. We worked with other groups, CBF of Kentucky and other institutions, as far as trying to find a way to say we need to put a stop to this in our state and ultimately nationally, because it's such a growing problem. But that's how we got started. The nuts and bolts of the particular ministry, I guess we could talk about at another time. We really got help from University Heights Baptist Church in Springfield, Missouri. They were a template for us, and we tweaked their plan and began that here in Frankfort.
Unmute, John Mark.
I'm glad you mentioned University Heights, because Bob is the founder of University Hope at University Heights Baptist Church. We'll hear from him in a little bit about how their program got started. But Scarlette, I want to come to you now. You're in a little bit different situation. You're a field personnel who's working to do some of this work. Tell us about how this came about for you, and tell us what that looks like.
Well, I began this work before coming to CBF, before getting involved with CBF. I've been involved in advocacy efforts in this field for about 15 years. It began when I worked for a domestic violence shelter. That's where I began my training as a financial counselor, and I went ahead through the years and became a financial counselor with all of my training through NeighborWorks America. And I did everything from basic budget and credit counseling, predatory lending counseling, to loss mitigation, foreclosure intervention counseling, homeownership counseling. So I was involved in a lot of financial literacy efforts and a lot of one-on-one financial counseling with families. And a lot of those families came from various diverse economic situations. But what I kept running into, especially with the families I was working with that were the working poor or lower income, was the payday lending issue. And so I just got to be a lot more familiar with that institution of lending. And it just has really been on my heart for a long time, and I've been advocating for payday lending rate caps and policy changes for many years. So, my hope that eventually that happens. But in the meantime, something has to be done to help these families. So, I began doing a lot of financial counseling, working with families, trying to help them get out of the payday lending trap prior to coming to Cooperative Baptist Fellowship. And that has continued to be a large part of my ministry as field personnel, is being involved in financial literacy education and working with families. And so with a grant from CBF Kentucky, I've been able to implement a microloan program. And we're still in early stages of that. But, it's just something that, we have to do something until these policies change. These families get caught into these lending traps and can't get out. And what I came across is it's just families that ended up in a desperate situation that needed help. And it was the only option that they have. So if we can provide a better option for them, then, that's what we're here for. But, like I said, I've been involved in this work for a very long time, and, it's just something I was so pleased when I came to CBF that we all had a heart for this issue. And it was one of the things that really has drawn me to my work. And I'm thankful for the opportunity to be able to continue to do that as field personnel.
Yeah, I think, Scarlette, we are very grateful for your work as field personnel doing some of this work too. It's a different kind of entry point for some of our congregations and folks into the work as well. Okay, so Bob, let's go to you. So like I said, you were one of the co-founders of University Hope at University Heights, a program that many other churches have modeled their own programs off of. Tell us about how University Hope got started. Tell us what that looked like.
All right, glad to do that, John Mark. I'm a retired pastor, missionary, church consultant, and I function now as a layperson at University Heights Baptist Church. We're citizens there, and this all started for us about 5.5 years ago. Our pastor at the time, Danny Chisholm, preached a sermon on Luke chapter 4, the passage that John Mark referred to at the beginning, and that sermon struck me fresh. At that time, I heard Jesus say that he came to bring good news to the poor and freedom to captives and so forth. So we pulled together a group of volunteers in the church interested in studying poverty. Springfield, Missouri has a significant poverty issue for a city our size. And so we studied it. We did some reading. We did a poverty simulation exercise. We rode the city buses to get an idea of what transportation is like for the working poor in Springfield. And out of all of that, we looked for where people were falling through the cracks. Springfield had food pantries, clothing closets, various ways to help people with utilities and rent. But where there was nothing that we could tell was to help people get out of predatory loans. And so the church took an offering, raised some money. We began with $5,000 donated by actually 5 of our members. And that began the ministry. We wanted to offer alternative loans at very low interest rates. So it'd be a revolving fund and help people get out of the predatory loans. So that was the beginning. We made our first loan just about 5 years ago right now. And since then, our people and others in the community have given $80,000. We've been able to help about 80 families escape from predatory loans. And Bob Reed, my partner in this, is a deacon layman in the church, has been involved fully in this and really given a lot of time and energy to it since the beginning. So that's how we got started and what we've been doing. Our church really welcomed the opportunity to do something hands-on, direct, person to person, to try to help the working poor. Like others have said, the real answer to this comes with advocacy and getting laws changed. But in the meantime, we want to help who we can. And it's really been a good thing for our church. We've had people come and join the church. That's not why we did it. We did it to fulfill the command of Jesus. But we've had people come and join and be baptized as a result of this ministry. And I think everybody in our church really feels good about what we've been doing.
Yeah, so now that we know a little bit about how your ministries have all started, I'd love to hear about what the folks who came to you looking for help, what they kind of looked like, what their circumstances were, and how they find you all. And Scarlette, if you don't mind, if you'd start us off on that question.
Sure. Um, yeah, the folks that come are just regular folks. We have I've had folks from various walks of life. I've had one lady that I advocated with. Her son had lost his job, and so she went to get a payday loan to help get them through to till he could get his unemployment going and or get another job, and was hoping that that would happen quickly, and of course it did not, and so she was stuck in that cycle of paying this payday loan until her son was able to pay her back. I had, especially early on when I got started, like I said, I worked in a shelter for victims of domestic violence. And several of the women that I worked with in there and came in contact with had taken out loans, to get away, to get a fresh start. I've had, so many, the car tore up, and you have to get the car fixed because without your vehicle, you can't get to work. So it's just life circumstances, things that happen that can happen to any of us. And, the folks that we're working with they don't have the option to go to the bank to get a loan. They don't have a family member that they can borrow it from. So, it is a place that they can go to get the funds that they need right now for an emergency. But the problem is the model that's being used to provide this service for them. So, the folks that I'm working with are just everyday folks. It could be your neighbor, and often probably is. You're probably just not aware of it. So the circumstances are just life things that happen. And like I said, I've been doing this type of work for a long time. So I have a lot of partners. I work a lot with various community agencies, senior centers, housing authorities, other nonprofits. So anytime I do a presentation about my ministry at a community event or just in talking with partners, that's a large part of what I share. So I get referrals from all types of agencies and partners that I work with, as well as individuals that just come through. I do some of my ministry, a couple of days a week from First Baptist Corbin. And so, folks that come through there that maybe are calling the church for benevolence funds, so they refer them to me. So that way, I can see if there's a situation like that, a circumstance like that I'm able to help with. So it's referrals. I don't have a lack of referrals. Unfortunately, we have a lot of folks that end up in this situation in these type of predatory loans. So that's how they find me. It's not hard. So like it's relationships. It's relationships with your community and with churches that are ministering to folks in the community that could end up in this situation.
Yeah, you hit on some interesting points there, Scarlette, especially the relationship aspect of this. I think one of the things that is really a wonderful opportunity for churches is to create lasting presence in their communities by doing some of this work. Bob, what about at University of Hope and University Heights? What were some of those circumstances folks came to y'all with, and how did they find y'all?
When we first began the ministry, we got quite a bit of news coverage. Local television stations were interested in it. There was already concern about predatory lending. Springfield had about 75 storefronts doing payday and title loans, so everybody knew they were here and knew that they were predatory and problematic. And so we got quite a bit of news coverage, newspaper, television. In fact, there was a point where we had to tell our pastor he couldn't talk to television reporters anymore because we were overwhelmed with people wanting help. But all the way along, we've had people call the church office. They hear about us in the community. More recently, though, we've been dealing more with referrals from other local agencies. and that's helped our default rate. Initially, we didn't have very many people default on their loans. Then, after we operated a couple of years, we began to have more, and so we began to try to find ways to keep that from happening, so that folks would actually pay off their low interest loans, so we could keep the money revolving. But we found that when we take referrals from other helping agencies, very often they've vetted the people, they have a relationship with them, and it helps us to know who is more likely to be able to keep their lives on track and pay off the loan and get hopefully back at least among the lower middle class. We're dealing mostly with working poor, people on very limited incomes, and so we want to help them at least maintain that, if not make some progress in their lives.
Yeah, it's interesting the comment you made, Bob, about Danny and his popularity with local media when this was happening. I think that's pretty funny. Keith, talk to us about the folks who came to you. What were their circumstances, and how did they find you all? You might still be muted, Keith. Oh, there we go.
Am I on now?
You're good to go.
Am I talking? Okay, sorry. I mentioned earlier that our church is a downtown church, and so we get lots of folks that just come to our door anyway. And so I was able, as Minister of Missions, to talk to them about this new ministry that we're doing. Our church operates a clothes closet that opens every Wednesday, and I have done an opening prayer for that time, and we usually have 25 to 40 people there every Wednesday night looking for clothes in our clothes closet. So word got out that way. And then our church operates a charitable clinic, a medical dental clinic, and every Wednesday as well, I help in there and get to talk to people and begin to talk to them about this new ministry that we have been working on. And so that's how the word got out, and then it just spread from there. They told their neighbors referred other people, and as others have said, I contacted other agencies in our town to say this is what we're doing, and we're starting out small, but we hope that it will grow, and it did. I can remember the very first interview that we had with a potential client, I'll say, and she was a waitress who had to pay for the funeral expenses of her grandmother and had to be off for 2 weeks because she was the only family member to be able to do that. She used the payday loan essentially to bury her grandmother, and she didn't have any paid leave as a waitress, and came to us just in shambles. And we offered this ministry and said we're glad to help. I can remember within the first year that we were doing it, we had a homeless man who had just recently gotten some housing development apartment, and his disability was like $660 a month, and that was his income. And he got a payday loan in order to help one of his friends who was getting out of jail for some just regular kinds of things to get started. And that was when he came to us. He had been in that payday loan for over 10 years. Conservatively speaking, he had paid over $19,000 on a $500 loan. And he was consistent in paying that. He never missed. But for over 10 years, he was paying on a $500 loan, and it was over $19,000 that he paid. And I think he paid his off within like 8 months, as far as what our loan did. And that's the tragedy of this. And I think the criminality of this is that somebody just in perpetuity gets caught in these loans and nobody has any mercy on them. and it's a shame. But that's how people heard about us, just with existing ministries and other agencies in town.
I've heard a lot about a lot of really high costs for folks in the end. That's one of the highest I've ever heard.
It was,
is that
we couldn't
that
believe
story.
it. It was tragic, but it's not uncommon. We've heard of others, not that high. That was the highest that we'd ever heard, or the longest we'd ever heard. But there are others out there similar.
Yeah, as I'm just thinking, it might be the third longest I've ever heard of, and honestly, maybe the highest I've ever heard of. But
those are conservative numbers. We have financial
that's right.
in our church that looked at it and said, conservatively speaking, he's paid over $19,000.
Yeah, it's mind-boggling to an extent.
Yeah.
I want to talk a bit about the predatory lending landscape in the locations you are. But first, I want to throw that question to Stephen, and hopefully he can provide us a national update on payday lending and where we stand and what can be done about that kind of stuff. So Stephen, go ahead.
Thanks, John Mark. Typically and historically, usury laws, which is what these folks have managed to change or find a way to violate via loophole, are handled at the state level. And so this is very much a state-by-state situation. I believe the last count was 16 states in the District of Columbia have stringent enough laws that they do not allow this sort of predatory lending. And so that's good, but a whole lot of other states do. And for CBF, we noticed that some of the states that have many of our churches are some of the worst. It is really the South and the Bible Belt that have some of the worst payday lending out there. North Carolina and Arkansas are notable exceptions. Gratefully, Arkansas does not have it. North Carolina has a good rate cap there as well. But for a lot of our places, the situation is very bad. In a few places, one will have payday loans and not auto title lending, and vice versa. Georgia's outlawed payday loans but have title pawn or title loans, which are equally egregious. Instead of taking the money directly from someone's bank account in a payday loan situation, they repo their car. And in most places where these practices go on, public transportation is not a viable option for folks. And so many times title loans can put people in worse place. But back in 2013, when we started this work at CBF Advocacy, for the first time ever, there was a national agency that was going to have authority to write rules and regulations for the entire country, and that's the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. CBF has been very involved with the process of putting forward first a good, strong rule that we thought was going to really help people, because it forced the lenders to assess somebody's ability to repay before they gave them a loan. But unfortunately, in the last 2 years or so, new leadership at the CFPB has effectively repealed that good rule before it could ever take effect. And so most of the regulation is going to be kicked back to the states now. However, I want to mention that Congress actually can act and institute a nationwide 36% interest rate cap, which we believe would be the strongest and best defense to this sort of predatory lending. And there is precedence. They've done it before. In 2006, they signed the Military Lending Act that did just that, and President Bush signed it into law, which was an attempt to really prevent the exploitation we were seeing in our service members. They were very vulnerable to this type of practice. And unfortunately, the lenders found loopholes in that, and the Department of Defense has been trying to close them down. So we think that if this sort of protection is good enough for our military families and service members, then it should be afforded to everyone. And so hopefully Congress can act, but I suspect that most of the action is going to go back to the state level.
So now that we're back to the state level, Bob, tell us about Missouri. What's kind of the state of play there?
Because of our work with University Hope, we got involved with Faith Voices of Missouri. It's an advocacy group that's been trying to lobby the state legislature, and we've been to Jeff City to testify and talk to various committees, but we haven't been able to get our state legislature to do anything about setting a rate cap. The interest rate allowed in Missouri right now is 1,950% APR. Now, the highest loan we've actually seen was 725%, but it's the common loan we see is 350 to 450% annual interest. So Missouri needs to do something, but so far they have not. At the local level, we've been able to see some things done, like in St. Louis, and I believe in Liberty, Missouri, and now in Springfield, we got the city council to adopt an ordinance that puts a $5,000 annual fee on every title loan and payday loan storefront. And so that fee will be collected by the city and used to educate people about the danger of these loans, used to help any local agencies that are offering alternatives to payday loans. And hopefully, at least at the local level, we'll be able to do something through legislation that'll help with this.
Yeah, that story about Second Liberty and their work to kind of rally folks around a ballot initiative last fall for this to really kind of regulate the payday lending industry in Liberty is a really cool story, and one that I relate in the resource. So folks, if you want to hear that story, make sure you check that out. Keith, what about it? What about in Kentucky? What's kind of the state of play with payday loans in the state of Kentucky?
Actually, the storefronts, as far as their numbers for payday loan industry, has gone down. There have been a little bit of some work on policies. It used to be the Wild West as far as payday loan was concerned. They've outlawed as far as online payday loans that come in from out of state. And so that's a good thing, but we still get people that come in for help with us, and we'll investigate what payday loan place they're getting this from, and we'll find that it's online from out of state. And we said that's not legal here in Kentucky, and therefore they don't have any kind of latitude over you. So it's kind of back and forth in Kentucky. The problem is that it just needs to go away, and because, as Scarlette can testify to better than I can, we have two of the poorest counties in the entire country in our state. In Eastern Kentucky, I go down to Owsley County a lot. We operate a missions center in Owsley County, which is one of the poorest counties in the country. And I see all sorts of signs for payday loans. And it saddens me, but it makes me angry too, that someone would want to exploit the poor like that in an impoverished state for the most part. Maybe Scarlette has some updates as far as current legislation, but that's as much as I know right now.
That's about what I know as well too, Keith. And as far as the landscape in the rural communities I work in, these are some of the businesses that are thriving. Some of my larger rural areas, one particular, I have 5 of these institutions within a 1-mile radius. And then in my other rural areas that maybe have 1 or 2, these are the businesses that are just really booming right now. So, it is what it is. And we just have to continue the fight.
Well, we still see people come in with over 400% interest rates on their payday loans. And it's astronomical. They feel, it's terminal for them. They'll never get out of it without some type of help.
Right. That's about the average interest rate I see. I have some of my other colleagues have seen up to 600% here in Kentucky. And it's just the model. They're just, it's trapped.
Yeah,
They're
and
trapped
even
in
bring
it.
that point home even more so. In a 2016 study done by NBC News, there were more payday lending institutions in the United States than there were Starbucks and McDonald's stores combined. That's, it's remarkable. Just down the street from me, I can get to Starbucks within 1.5 miles, and that's 3 different Starbucks locations. So to think that there's even more of these in Starbucks and McDonald's combined is absolutely astonishing, I think. We got some good questions coming in from our viewers on YouTube and Facebook, and several of these are about ministry mechanics for setting up your program. So we'll kind of do these kind of quickly. So for all you folks, especially for Keith and Bob, since you're in churches, and then we'll get to Scarlette too. Is your ministry its own separate 501c3, or is it part of your church? Keith.
It's part of our church, but we partner with Commonwealth Credit Union here in town, and so they handle the logistics of the loan, and we do a primary interview as far as investigating the loan and helping folks get educated about it. And so, no, it's not its own 501c3.
Gotcha. And Bob, what about with y'all?
Yeah, that's the same with us. We've worked with a couple of local credit unions, and we actually just have money on deposit with them to guarantee the loans, but they make the loan. And so the church is not in the business of making loans and collecting money and putting our tax exempt status at risk. So the partnership with the credit union has worked very well for us. And then the other piece of ours is trying to have a volunteer, a church member, serve as a mentor to every loan recipient so that we establish a relationship and keep in touch and try to have an ongoing friendship that hopefully can be supportive for the person.
Sure. Scarlette, what's that look like for you in your context? Because your context is just a bit different than Bob and Keith.
My context is different. I am my own 501c3, and so I do carry my own board insurance and liability insurance. So right now, I handle all of that, and I am looking for a credit union partner. The problem is that I cover a diverse area, so there's multiple credit unions. So I'm still navigating that process, but with me, since I am my own 501c and I do it, my participants are required to do the financial literacy work with me. They're required to meet with me once a month via phone or whatever method we are doing with COVID, is to look at their budget and review that. So that's a large part of it. So it's very relational, and very one-on-one in my context.
Yeah, sure. The relational aspect of this, I don't think can be stated enough how important it is to work to kind of build and maintain some of that relationship. Bob, I see you raising your hand up there. Do you have something else to add to it?
One thing I wanted to add was that the pandemic has changed the picture very much. Maybe you were going to be getting to that, but I'll go ahead and launch into it. The need for payday loans dropped off, for payday loan assistance dropped off drastically with the virus. A lot of, at least in our area, a lot of the payday loan places were shut down like everything else. Plus, when people got the stimulus help from the government, that influx of cash helped a lot of people that otherwise would have been looking perhaps for a payday loan. So we suddenly found that we were not getting as many requests for payday loan assistance. But now that if the government does not do an additional stimulus to help people, it is going to get really bad, and already is here. And so since University Hope had about $36,000 available, our steering group decided we're not going to just sit on that money. while we're not doing a lot of payday loan rescues, we will make grants, even though it means, the money won't be replenished. We're dealing with people who are about to be evicted, people whose power utilities have been cut off, and there's no hope anytime very soon that they'd be able to make payments even on a low interest loan. So for the past month or so, we've actually been doing grants and help people avoid getting evicted and be able to get their utilities back on.
Sure. Yeah, the pandemic for sure is a complicating factor in this. And it's good to hear that the pandemic, at least at the beginning, slowed down some of that. But as with everything, I think it's going to negatively impact in the end. And that seems to be what you're relating to us, Bob. Real quick, let's talk about loan size for folks that come to you all. What's the maximum amount of money that you all are willing to partner with your credit union to give out? About $1,000, more or less? Keith, what about with y'all at FBC Frankfurt?
Hard and fast line as far as that's concerned. It depends upon the situation, but 1,000 has been our guideline for that.
Scarlette, what about with you?
With me, usually the loans are smaller, but I have granted loans up to $2,000, and that was specifically for vehicle assistance in those particular cases, because without that, those individuals would not be able to work. And so, that's my maximum there, but usually they're much smaller.
Sure. And Bob, what about University Hope?
Yeah, at the beginning, we were being pretty flexible, and I think the highest one we did was $1,500. But pretty quickly, we realized that we needed to limit it to 1,000. We were having people come in with multiple payday loans totaling $5,000, $6,000, $10,000, and we realized that we just didn't have funds available to help those people. And my partner, Bob Reeves, says if somebody's $10,000 into payday loans and you loan them 1,000, that's like throwing somebody a 1-foot rope when they're in a 10-foot pit. You've not really helped them. And so we have pretty well stuck the last couple of years to $1,000 limit.
Yeah, Keith. You're still muted, Keith.
I'm still muted. There we go.
There you go. Now you're good. Now you're good.
I think it's important to say this concerning legislation, and that is our politicians are essentially getting their pockets lined with a lot of money in order to maintain this predatory lending, and this is public record, I believe, for every state, but I know in the state of Kentucky that the highest paid lobbyist gets paid close to $1 million a year, and he works for one of the payday loan industries. And he's the highest paid lobbyist in our state. And that's tragic, but I think it's important for us to investigate what our politicians are doing in partnership with this industry, and be able to vote accordingly.
I'll reiterate that as someone who's worked very closely with a lot of policymakers in Texas and in Washington and seen it firsthand. This industry is a multi-billion-dollar industry. As long as they're allowed to hire all the lobbyists and all the lawyers that will provide and make all the campaign contributions and the PAC contributions that they can, then it's just a math problem for them. It is worth the investment to keep that billions of dollars coming. And as my friend and Pastor Steve Wells, who does this work with us quite frequently, says, they can afford those because they have all the money of all the struggling folks in our communities in their pockets. And so that is why it's been a struggle, even at the state level. It's why it's been a struggle in Congress, and it's why we had a lot of hope that the CFPB would be insulated from some of those types of political and financial pressures that exist in the other realm. And unfortunately, we've been disappointed up to this point. But I just want to commend all of you all, the three of you, and the many folks who in CBF Life are taking this seriously. And I mean, it really is an encouraging form of advanced benevolence, where you can pay somebody's loan off, but that probably may not get them to the next loan. And so it really is giving them another loan that they can then pay back is so much better than giving them money just to make a payment when they're still in the trap. And so this is it's exciting, and I hope more folks in CBF Life will marry their advocacy and charitable work in the local community together, because we need a lot more of that.
Yeah, we talked about the lobbying money that goes out in support of payday lending. It's important to note that it goes to both aisles. It's not just the right or the left. They are in the pockets of a lot of folks on both sides of the spectrum. But on the other hand, there's a lot of religious folks who come from a wide spectrum who say this is a really evil practice in a lot of ways. When you have U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, and you have the Southern Baptists, you have the ELCA Church, and you have us all saying the same thing, I think that offers a pretty strong faith witness that we got to find a way to end this problem. I want to close out with one last question for all four of you. And that question is, if you were to offer one word of advice to a church that wants to begin their own ministry, what would it be? And Bob, we'll start with you.
Well, I think the key to it is having at least one person with a passion for doing it. We've tried to involve other local churches here in Springfield and offered training and met with committees and so forth, and haven't had much luck because I think ultimately for any ministry to succeed, especially one that's entrepreneurial and non-traditional, someone has to have a passion and really feel a sense of calling to do it. So I guess that would be a key part of my advice. I would encourage churches to get involved in this, but also to find that person who will really work at it and see it through.
Keith, what would your one word of advice be? You're still muted. Oh, there you go.
Education. I believe that once faith people realize what's going on to their neighbors, a lot of our church folks don't have any idea even what it is, even though, like Scarlette said, we've helped people from all walks of life, but a lot of people don't know what it is. And I think once they get educated on it, and once you marry it to your biblical understanding of justice and poverty and helping the poor, I think that gets people energized as far as, well, what can we do? And then you have an opportunity, like I did, to say, well, I know of a church who's doing something, and maybe we could talk with them. And we talked with University Heights Baptist Church. I would be very happy to share all of our documents, our nuts and bolts of how we started and how we operate, and share that with anybody.
Scarlette, what would your one word of advice be to folks who are interested in starting this kind of ministry?
My word is education as well on the different aspects. Because for me, a large part of my ministry is that financial literacy education, because I want to equip the folks that are coming to me with tools to help them in the future. So not just to get through this one incident, but to try to help them, give the tools and the education that they need about these predatory lending practices and the really what they're paying, so that they don't want to go back there and try to give them tools to equip them so they don't have to go back there. So for me, it's education as well. And I, also back to that relationship, being in covenant with the folks, walking
Stephen,
with them.
offer us one word of advice.
Partnership. Find that credit union or that or the person in your, like what Bob said, find the person passionate about it and do this together. It's you can't do it by yourself, and churches aren't set up to be financial institutions. You really need to find that partnership to do it. And I want to lift up one other thing we haven't mentioned so far, and that is the racial justice component of this industry and the racial exploitation of this in this financial area. And I'll just tell from a personal story that when I first started working on this issue over 10 years ago, I probably gave my first, 5 or 10 presentations explaining the problem in white audiences. And there was basically 2 reactions. And that was, I had no idea what this was. And how can this be legal? And then I gave the same presentation in an African-American church, and they said, oh yeah, we know. Let me tell you about my son, my cousin, my friend. And this was sort of anecdotal evidence at first, but then that has been borne out even in some surveys that we did in the Faith for Just Lending Coalition, that there is a real terrible focus sometimes on African-American communities in particular. Obviously, that anybody can be taken advantage of this, and it's wrong when it happens to anybody. But I think we need to be aware of those components as well. And I think in this time in our nation, a lot of folks are trying to figure out what can we do about racial injustice. And people probably don't think about the exploitation in financial industries very often, and certainly don't think it's something that they can do, have any kind of impact on it. But this sort of ministry and this sort of advocacy gets right to that in many of the communities where this is prevalent.
Yeah, that's right. And I'm glad you got to bring that up for us, Stephen. It's one of the, it just offers a whole nother entry point to working towards racial justice in a way that offers tangible solutions. Thanks to those of you who have been watching and offering terrific questions today. The work of caring for communities and offering folks relief from poverty is vast. Our partners in CBF churches and communities across the U.S. who are doing this work are vital to extending the presence of hospitality and being an instrument for God's justice. I want to thank Stephen, Scarlette, Bob, and Keith for their gracious use of their time today and for their wisdom in caring for the poor and marginalized in their communities and in similar ones across the country. Thank you for the tireless work you do to serve your communities and be the presence of Christ. You are truly working to renew God's kingdom here on earth. I want to remind folks who are watching at home, make sure you visit www.cbf.net/rescue loans to find out more and to figure out how you can work the nuts and bolts of this to get this kind of ministry set up in your own congregation. I also want to offer a quick plug of our new CBF Advocacy Toolkit. It's called The Mission of Advocacy. You can find that on Amazon or through Good Faith Media, who work to publish it through Nurturing Faith for us. That's another great way to figure out how to expand your advocacy profile in your own congregation. Thanks for attending, and I hope that everyone has a great rest of your week.